The wind came down from the mountains like a blade. Caleb Marsh pulled his coat tighter and squinted through the swirl of white. The snow had been falling for 2 days straight, blanketing the Wyoming Valley in silence so thick it felt like the world had stopped breathing. He'd ridden out to check the fence line near the North Ridge. Cattle had a way of wandering when storms hit, and he couldn't afford to lose any more stock this winter. But what he found wasn't cattle. At first, he thought it was a deer carcass half buried in the drift, something dark against all that white. He reined his horse to a stop, breath misting in the frozen air, and dismounted slowly. His boots sank deep into the snow with each step. Then he saw the hand. Small, pale, fingers curled inward like a bird's claw. Caleb's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He dropped to his knees and started digging, snow burning his hands even through the gloves. A shoulder emerged, then a face, young, maybe 16, 17 at most. Her lips were blue, her skin the color of ash. Her eyes were closed, lashes crusted with ice. She wore a thin cotton dress, torn at the hem and soaked through, no coat, no shoes. Her feet were wrapped in strips of cloth that had frozen stiff. "Jesus," Caleb whispered. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat. For a long moment there was nothing, then faint, so faint he almost missed it, a pulse, weak and slow but there. She was alive. Barely. Caleb didn't waste time. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like she was made of straw and bone. Her head lolled against his chest, and that's when he saw it. Around her neck, half hidden beneath the collar of her dress, hung a locket. Silver, tarnished, delicate filigree along the edges. Caleb froze. He knew that locket. His hand trembled as he reached out and turned it over in his palm. On the back, engraved in script so fine it was barely visible, were 2 initials, E.M. Eliza Marsh. His wife. The locket he'd given her on their wedding day 7 years ago, the one she'd been wearing the night she died. The night their cabin burned. The night he buried her in the churchyard with nothing left to bury but ash and memory. Caleb's vision blurred. The wind howled around him, but he couldn't hear it. All he could hear was the roar of blood in his ears, the hammer of his own heartbeat. This girl, this stranger, was wearing his dead wife's locket. He looked down at her face, searching for answers in features he didn't recognize. She was nobody he'd ever seen before. Pale hair, sharp cheekbones, a scar that ran from her temple down to her jaw. She didn't look like Eliza, didn't look like anyone from town. But she had the locket. Howled. Caleb's mind raced. The fire had been 3 years ago. The marshal had called it an accident, a lantern knocked over, oil spilled, flames spreading too fast. Eliza had been alone that night. Caleb had been in town, meeting with the bank about a loan. By the time he rode home, there was nothing left but smoke and ruin. He'd searched the wreckage for days, found her wedding ring melted into the floorboards, found the charred remains of her Bible, but the locket, he'd never found the locket. He'd assumed it burned with everything else. But here it was, around the neck of a girl half dead in the snow. Caleb forced himself to move. Questions could wait. If he didn't get her warm, she'd be dead before he got answers. He carried her to his horse and hauled himself up into the saddle, cradling her against his chest. She didn't stir, didn't make a sound. Her breathing was so shallow he had to press his cheek close to her mouth just to feel it. The ride back to the ranch took an hour. The snow fell harder, erasing his tracks as fast as he made them. By the time he reached the cabin, his arms were numb and his jaw ached from clenching against the cold. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her down on the bed near the stove. He stoked the fire until it roared, then peeled off her frozen dress and wrapped her in every blanket he owned. Her skin was like ice. Her fingernails were black at the tips. Frostbite. Caleb boiled water and soaked towels, pressing them gently to her hands and feet. He'd seen men lose fingers to cold like this. Toes, whole limbs, sometimes. He worked in silence, his mind still spinning. Who are you? Where did you come from? How did you get my wife's locket? Hours passed. The storm raged outside. Caleb sat beside the bed, watching her breathe. The locket lay on the table beside him, gleaming faintly in the firelight. He picked it up and opened it. Inside were two photographs. One was Eliza, her face soft and smiling, the way she'd looked on their wedding day. The other photograph was supposed to be him. He'd sat for it at the same time, both of them dressed in their best clothes, faces solemn for the camera. But the photograph of him was gone. In its place was a efferent image, faded, creased. A woman and a man standing in front of a cabin Caleb didn't recognize. The woman had pale hair, like the girl in his bed. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Caleb stared at the photograph for a long time. Then the girl on the bed stirred. Her eyes opened, pale gray, unfocused, and she looked at him without recognition. Her lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. Caleb leaned closer. What? Her voice was a rasp, barely human. He said, "You'd come." Who said? But her eyes had already closed again, and she slipped back under. Caleb sat back, his pulse hammering. He said you'd come. The words echoed in his head, cold and strange and wrong. Outside, the wind screamed. And somewhere deep in the valley, something howled back. She didn't wake again until morning. Caleb had stayed up through the night, feeding the fire and checking her pulse every hour. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. The silence afterward was unsettling, too complete, like the land was holding its breath. When her eyes opened, they were clear this time, sharp, wary. She looked at him for a long moment, then down at herself, wrapped in blankets, her hands bandaged, her dress gone. Panic flashed across her face. "You're safe," Caleb said quickly. He held up his hands, palms out. "I found you in the snow. You were dying." She didn't relax. Her gaze flicked around the cabin, cataloging exits, looking for weapons. Her fingers curled into the blankets like she was ready to run. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. She didn't answer. He tried again. "How'd you end up out there? Were you running from something?" Still nothing. Caleb exhaled slowly. "All right, you don't have to talk, but you need to eat something and drink." He stood and ladled hot broth from the pot on the stove, pouring it into a tin cup. He set it on the table beside the bed, within her reach but not close enough to crowd her. She stared at the cup like it might bite her. "It's just broth," Caleb said. "Venison, nothing fancy." Her eyes moved to his face. For the first time, he saw something there, something raw and broken and buried deep. "Why?" she whispered. "Why what? Why help me?" Caleb didn't know how to answer that. Because she was dying, because leaving someone to freeze felt like something he couldn't live with, because she was wearing his dead wife's locket and he needed to know why. He settled on the simplest truth, "Because I could." She looked away, her jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she might cry, but she didn't. She just reached for the cup with shaking hands and brought it to her lips. She drank in small sips, wincing like it hurt. When she finished, she set the cup down and pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "My name's Rosalie," she said finally. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "Rosalie Tanner." Caleb nodded. "Caleb Marsh." Recognition flickered in her eyes, just for a second, then it was gone. "You know that name," Caleb said. She shook her head, too fast. "No." "You're lying." Her expression hardened. "What do you want me to say?" Caleb leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I want you to tell me where you got that locket." Her hand went to her throat. The locket was still there, resting against her collarbone. She looked down at it, her fingers brushing the silver. "It was my mother's," she said. "That's not true." "It is." "I know that locket," Caleb said quietly. "I gave it to my wife on our wedding day. She was wearing it the night she died. And now you've got it around your neck. So I'll ask you again, where did you get it?" Rosalie's face went pale. Her fingers tightened around the locket like she was afraid he'd rip it away. "I didn't steal it," she said, "if that's what you think." "Then how's?" "My mother gave it to me," her voice cracked, "before she died." Caleb went still. "Who was your mother?" Rosalie looked him in the eye, and for the first time he saw the truth written there, guilt and grief and something darker. "Her name was Clara Tanner," Rosalie said. "She worked at the saloon in Ridgewood. She knew your wife." The air went out of the room. Caleb sat back slowly, his mind spinning. Clara Tanner. He didn't know the name, didn't remember Eliza ever mentioning it. "How?" he asked. Rosalie's voice dropped to almost nothing. "The man who burned your cabin, he didn't mean to kill her." Caleb's blood turned to ice. "What?" "He was looking for something, a deed. Your wife kept it hidden. He thought if he scared her, she'd tell him where it was, but the fire spread too fast." Rosalie's hands were shaking now. "My mother, she was there. She saw it happen. She tried to stop him, but he—" She broke off, her breath hitching. Caleb's vision blurred, his hands clenched into fists. "Who?" Rosalie's eyes glistened. "Samuel Tanner, my father." The name hit Caleb like a fist to the goo. "T." Samuel Tanner, the man who'd tried to buy Caleb's land 2 months before the fire. The man who'd smiled and shaken his hand and said, "If you ever change your mind, the offer stands." The man who'd disappeared 3 weeks after Eliza died. "Your father killed my wife," Caleb said. His voice was flat, dead. "I know," Rosalie's tears spilled over. "I know, and my mother, she took the locket from the cabin before anyone saw. She kept it hidden. She said it was proof. She said one day someone would come looking for the truth." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "She died 2 months ago, fever. Before she went, she told me to find you. She said you deserved to know." Caleb couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything he'd believed about that night, the accident, the lantern, the random cruelty of fate, all of it was a lie. Eliza hadn't died by accident. She'd been murdered. And the man who did it had a daughter sitting in his cabin, wearing the proof around her neck. Rosalie's voice broke through the roar in his head. "I didn't come here for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. I needed you to know, and then I'll leave, I'll disappear, you'll never see me again." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. She was just a girl, thin and scared and broken. She hadn't killed Eliza, hadn't lit the match. But she carried the weight of it anyway. "Where's your father now?" Caleb asked. Rosalie's face went pale. "I don't know. He left after my mother died. I haven't seen him since." "And you came here alone, in the middle of winter." "I didn't have anywhere else to go." Caleb stood and walked to the window. Outside, the snow stretched on forever, white and endless and cold. Somewhere out there, Samuel Tanner was still breathing. And Caleb intended to fix that. 3 days passed. Rosalie's frostbite healed slowly. She could walk now, though her feet were still tender and her hands ached in the cold. Caleb gave her Eliza's old clothes, a wool dress, thick stockings, a coat lined with rabbit fur. She didn't say thank you, but she wore them without complaint. They didn't talk much. Caleb spent most of his time outside, chopping wood or tending the horses, trying to work the rage out of his system. Every time he looked at Rosalie, he saw Eliza's face in the flames, heard her screaming. He knew it wasn't the girl's fault. But knowing didn't make it easier. On the 4th day, the riders came. Caleb was in the barn, mucking out stalls, when he heard the hoofbeats, 3 horses moving fast. He set down the pitchfork and stepped outside, squinting against the glare of sunlight on snow. 3 men reined to a stop in front of the cabin. The one in the lead was tall and broad, with a thick beard and a marshal's badge pinned to his coat. Marshal Webb. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd never liked Webb. The man had a reputation for looking the other way when money changed hands. After Eliza died, Webb had barely investigated, called it an accident, and closed the case in 2 days. "Marsh," Webb said, his breath misting in the cold. "Mind if we come in?" "Depends, what do you want?" Webb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just checking in, heard you brought someone back from the ridge. Girl, right. Caleb's pulse quickened. Who told you that? Doesn't matter, is she here? Why? Webb's smile faded. Because I'm asking. Caleb stepped forward, blocking the path to the cabin. She's none of your business. Actually, she is. Webb dismounted and handed his reins to one of the men behind him. Her name's Rosalie Tanner, isn't it? Caleb said nothing. Thought so. Webb took a step closer. Samuel Tanner's daughter. He's been looking for her. Says she ran off with something that belongs to him. And you believe him? I believe a man's got a right to his property. She's not property. Webb's expression hardened. She's a runaway, and you're harboring her. That makes you complicit. Caleb's hands curled into fists. She's not going anywhere. That's not your decision to make. She told me what her father did, Caleb said quietly, what he did to my wife. Webb's eyes narrowed. Is that so? You closed that case too fast, didn't ask questions, didn't dig. Why? Because there was nothing to dig, Marsh. It was an accident. It was murder. Webb's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, guilt maybe, or fear. Then it was gone. You're upset, Webb said. I understand that, but you're chasing ghosts. Samuel Tanner's a respected landowner. You think he'd risk everything to burn down your cabin? For what? A piece of dirt. For the deed, Caleb said. Eliza had proof that his claim to the North Valley was fraudulent. He bought it off a Union officer who didn't have the right to sell it. She was going to file a complaint with the territorial governor. Webb went very still. You knew, Caleb said. His voice was cold. You knew the whole time. I don't know what you're talking about. You were in on it. He paid you to look the other way. Webb's hand moved to the pistol on his hip. Careful, Marsh. Caleb didn't flinch. She died because of greed, and you helped cover it up. One of the men behind Webb shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his rifle. The other one watched with dead eyes. Webb took another step forward. His voice dropped to a murmur. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to bring the girl out. We're going to take her back to her father. And you're going to forget this conversation ever happened. No. Webb's expression darkened. You really want to die over this? I want justice. Justice? Webb laughed, sharp and bitter. There's no justice out here, Marsh. There's just power, and you don't have any. The cabin door opened. Rosalie stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in Eliza's coat. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. Don't, Caleb said. She looked at him. Her eyes were steady. It's all right. No, it's not. She walked down the steps, moving slowly, her feet still tender. Webb watched her approach, his hand still resting on his pistol. Smart girl, he said. Rosalie stopped a few feet away. I'll go with you, but you leave him alone. That wasn't part of the deal. It is now. Webb studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. Fine, get on the horse. Rosalie turned to look at Caleb one last time. There was something in her eyes, an apology maybe, or a goodbye. Then she climbed onto the back of Webb's horse, and the marshals swung up behind her. Caleb took a step forward. Wait. One of the men pulled his rifle and leveled it at Caleb's chest. Stay put. Webb tugged the reins and turned his horse. You're a good man, Marsh, but good men don't last long out here. He spurred the horse forward, and the three riders galloped off into the snow. Caleb stood in the cold, his breath coming hard and fast, watching them disappear over the ridge. Then he turned and walked back into the cabin. He strapped on his gun belt, loaded his rifle, pulled on his coat, and rode after them. Caleb tracked them for 2 hours. The snow made it easy, 3 sets of hoofprints cutting a clean line through the valley. Webb wasn't trying to hide, didn't think he needed to. That was his mistake. By the time Caleb crested the ridge overlooking Tanner's land, the sun was sinking low, turning the snow orange and gold. Below, sprawled across the valley floor, was Samuel Tanner's ranch, a sprawling compound of barns and cabins, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. Caleb dismounted and crouched behind a stand of pines, watching. The riders had stopped near the main house. Webb dismounted and hauled Rosalie down from the horse. She stumbled, catching herself against the porch railing. A man stepped out of the house, tall, broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the brim of a wide hat. Samuel Tanner. Even from a distance, Caleb recognized him. Tanner grabbed Rosalie by the arm and dragged her inside. The door slammed shut. Webb and his men lingered for a moment, exchanging words, then mounted up and rode off toward town. Caleb waited until they were out of sight. Then he led his horse down the slope, moving slow and quiet through the trees. He reached the edge of the property just as the last light bled out of the sky. The ranch was quiet now, most of the hands already bedded down for the night. A single lantern burned in the window of the main house. Caleb tied his horse to a tree and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. He reached the house and pressed his back against the wall, listening. Voices inside, muffled, angry. "Told you not to run," Tanner's voice, rough and mean. "I didn't have a choice," Rosalie, quieter, scared. "You made me look weak. You understand that? You made me look like I couldn't control my own blood. I don't belong to you." A crack, sharp and sudden, the sound of a hand striking flesh. Caleb's vision went red. He moved to the door, tested the handle, unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small, a kitchen and sitting area, a stove in the corner. Samuel Tanner stood in the center, his hand still raised. Rosalie was on the floor, one hand pressed to her cheek. Tanner turned, his eyes widened. The hell? Caleb didn't give him time to finish. He crossed the room in 3 strides and slammed his fist into Tanner's jaw. The man went down hard, crashing into the table. Rosalie scrambled back, her eyes wide. "Caleb." "Stay down," Caleb said. Tanner groaned and rolled onto his side, blood dripping from his split lip. "You're dead, Marsh." "Not yet." Caleb grabbed him by the collar and hauled him to his feet, slamming him against the wall. "But you're about to be." Tanner grinned, blood staining his teeth. "You don't have the guts." Caleb pulled his pistol and pressed it under Tanner's chin. "Try me." For the first time, fear flickered in Tanner's eyes. "Caleb, don't," Rosalie's voice, quiet, steady. "He didn't look at her. He killed Eliza. I know. He deserves to die." "I know," she stood slowly, her hand still pressed to her cheek. "But if you kill him, you'll hang. And then what? What does that fix?" Caleb's hand trembled. "He took everything from me." "I know," Rosalie said again. Her voice was soft, sad, but killing him won't bring her back. Caleb's vision blurred. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then he let go. Tanner collapsed to the floor, gasping. Caleb stepped back, his breath coming hard. "If I ever see you again," Caleb said quietly, "I'll finish this." Tanner didn't answer, just curled on the floor, clutching his throat. Caleb turned to Rosalie. "Come on." She hesitated. "Where?" "Anywhere but here." "If you're still with me, think about this. If you'd been Caleb, could you have walked away? Could you have let justice wait when the man who destroyed your life was right there in front of you? Pour yourself something warm, breathe with the story, and tell me, what would you have done?" They rode through the night, moving fast and quiet through the snow. Rosalie didn't ask where they were going, just held on and trusted him. By dawn, they reached Caleb's cabin. He helped her down from the horse and led her inside. The fire had gone out and the room was cold. He stoked it back to life, then put water on to boil. Rosalie sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap. Her cheek was bruised, swelling purple. Caleb poured her a cup of coffee and set it in front of her. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded. They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. Finally, Rosalie spoke. "Why'd you come for me?" Caleb looked at her. Because you deserved better. Her eyes glistened. I'm his daughter. You're not him. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. My whole life, people looked at me and saw him, saw his sins. I thought if I could just disappear, maybe I could be someone else. You can, Caleb said, but not by running. She looked up at him. Then how? By deciding who you want to be and living it every day. Rosalie nodded slowly. Then she reached up and unclasped the locket from around her neck. She set it on the table between them. This belongs to you, she said. Caleb looked at it for a long moment. Then he pushed it back toward her. Keep it, he said. You'll need it more than me. But it's proof. When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it. Rosalie picked up the locket, her fingers trembling. What if the time never comes? It will, Caleb said. Justice moves slow out here, but it moves. 3 weeks later, Marshal Webb came back. This time, he wasn't alone. Caleb heard the horses before he saw them, dozens of them moving fast. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, and watched as the riders crested the ridge. But they weren't Webb's men. At the front of the group rode a woman in a black coat, her face sharp and weathered. Behind her were ranchers, townspeople, farmers, men and women Caleb recognized from Ridgewood and the surrounding valley. The woman reined to a stop in front of the cabin. Caleb Marsh. That's me. My name's Adelaide Grant. I run the land office in Cheyenne. She dismounted and walked toward him, pulling a folded document from her coat. A young woman came to my office 2 weeks ago, said she had proof of fraudulent land claims in this territory, said Marshal Webb had been paid to cover it up. Caleb's pulse quickened. Rosalie. Adelaide nodded. She had a locket. Inside was a photograph and a deed, your wife's handwriting, documenting every illegal transaction Samuel Tanner made over the last 10 years. Caleb's breath caught. Eliza, she'd hidden the deed in the locket, and Rosalie's mother had kept it safe all this time. We've arrested Webb and Tanner both, Adelaide continued. They'll stand trial in Cheyenne next month, and the land, she handed him the document, it's been returned to the rightful owners, including you. Caleb stared at the paper in his hands. His land, Eliza's land, finally legally his. Where's Rosalie? He asked. Adelaide smiled faintly. She's waiting in town, said she didn't think you'd want to see her. Caleb folded the deed carefully. She's wrong. He found her at the boarding house, sitting on the porch steps with a canvas bag at her feet. She looked up as he approached, her expression wary. You came, she said. Of course I did. She stood slowly. I thought you'd hate me for what my father did, for. I don't hate you, Caleb said. I never did. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to do now. I don't have anywhere to go. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out the deed. He held it out to her. What's this? She asked. Your future, if you want it. She unfolded the paper and read it slowly. Her hands began to shake. Caleb, I can't. The North Quarter is yours, he said. It's good land. You can build something there, start over. Why, well, do you do this? Because Eliza would have wanted it, and because you deserve a chance to be more than what your father was. Rosalie's tears spilled over. She folded the deed and pressed it to her chest, her shoulders shaking. Caleb waited. Finally, she looked up at him. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. Yes, I do, she wiped her face. You gave me my life back. You didn't have to, but you did. Caleb nodded. Just make it count. I will, she said. I promise. The trial happened 6 weeks later. Caleb didn't attend. He didn't need to. The evidence was overwhelming. Eliza's documentation, testimony from Rosalie and others who'd been cheated, records of payments Webb had taken under the table. Samuel Tanner was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Marshal Webb got 10. Justice, slow and grinding, finally turned. By spring, Rosalie had started building. Caleb rode out to check on her progress one warm afternoon. She'd hired a few hands from town, and together they'd framed out a small cabin on the North Quarter. It wasn't much yet, just walls and a roof, but it was hers. She waved when she saw him coming, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "What do you think?" she called. Caleb dismounted and walked the perimeter. The cabin sat on a rise overlooking the valley with a view of the mountains to the west, the same mountains Eliza used to watch at sunset. "It's good," he said, "real good." Rosalie smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her. "I planted a garden out back," she said. "Tomatoes, beans, squash, and I've got 3 chickens now. They're terrible layers, but I'm working on it." Caleb laughed. It felt strange, that sound, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. They stood together in the sunlight, watching the valley stretch out before them. "She'd be proud of you," Rosalie said quietly, "your wife." Caleb nodded. "I think so." Rosalie reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket. She opened it and looked at the photograph of Eliza, then closed it gently. "I'm going to keep this safe," she said, "for as long as I live, so she's not forgotten." "She won't be," Caleb said. "Not by me, not by you." Years later, when the valley had grown and changed, and the old wounds had scarred over, people would still talk about the winter a girl was found in the snow. They'd talk about the rancher who took her in, even when it cost him everything. They'd talk about justice, delayed but not denied. And they'd talk about the cabin on the North Quarter, where a woman named Rosalie Tanner built a life out of ash and sorrow and second chances. Caleb Marsh kept the photograph of Eliza on his mantle. Every night, he'd light a candle beside it and sit in the quiet, remembering. Not the fire, not the pain, but her laugh, her hands in the garden, the way she used to hum while she worked. And when the wind came down from the mountains, cold and sharp, he'd close his eyes and imagine it was her voice, calling him home. The sun dipped low over the valley, dust rose around his boots, shadows stretched long across the snow. And for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Marsh felt like he could breathe.